Hello students. So after the fourth section, death by water, where water is a twin symbol of death as well as a symbol of rejuvenation, regeneration, revival, rebirth. And before that, in the fire sermon, we saw fire as a twin symbol, where fire is a fire of passions as well as a symbol of purification, that is purgatorial fire. And before that, in the first section, we saw rock as a twin symbol, where rock is a symbol of sterility as well as it stands for elemental values. So now after that, the fifth and final section of the wasteland, that is what the thunder said. And this is probably the most complex section of the wasteland. And this title is derived from Prajapati's voice speaking through thunder, as Eliot has stated in his notes. And it is an episode of revelation derived from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So the fifth section, what the thunder said. So in the notes, Eliot writes that in the first part of part 5, 3 themes are intertwined. The journey to Emmaus, the first one; second, the approach to Chapel Perilous; and the third one, the present decay of Eastern Europe. So the collating and apparently unrelated legendary stories and historical facts, they condense the ascents of man's fate from early times to our own age. Though the votaries of physical power and lust, they regain supremacy and torture the innocent and the honest. But the indefatigable spirit of the man of belief and conviction relentlessly, continuously, constantly struggles and promises salvation to the meek and humble through spiritual enlightenment. In the words of Raymond Suomi, these 3 themes are but illustrations of one single theme, and that theme is the falling down of the temporal world and the promise of a revivification through the spirit. So in the first or the opening lines, after the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the gardens, after the agony in stony places, the shouting and the crying, prison and palace and reverberation of thunder of spring over distant mountains, he who was living is now dead, we who are living are now dying with a little patience. So these opening lines, they describe the arrest of Jesus by the crowd headed by Judas. Torchlight red suggests the march of officers and men, led by Judas carrying lanterns, torches and weapons, and red is symbolic of terror and horror. The Garden of Gethsemane was the scene of Christ's arrest, and the frosty silence in the gardens describes the death-like quietness, silence that prevailed, and it descended on it after Jesus' arrest. And the agony in stony places, it speaks about the sufferings and pains of Jesus. The thunder's reverberation recalls the final moment of agony on the cross when he was crucified. Thus, the first 6 lines, they sum up the great events in the life of Christ. And the great events are the betrayal, the arrest, the trial, and crucifixion. So in these opening lines, Tiresias reconstructs in his mind the arrest of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, his public interrogation in the palace of the high priest, and his crucifixion in Golgotha. The Savior is dead, and we, wavering between belief and disbelief, dwindling between belief and disbelief, we are now dying with a little patience. The wastelanders. So here is no water, but only rock, rock and no water, and the sandy road, the road winding above among the mountains, which are mountains of rock without water. If there were water, we should stop and drink. Amongst the rock, one cannot stop or think. Sweat is dry and feet are in the sand. If there were only water amongst the rock, dead mountain mouth of carious teeth that cannot spit. Here one can neither stand nor lie nor sit. There is not even silence in the mountains, but dry sterile thunder without rain. There is not even solitude in the mountains, but red sullen faces sneer and snarl from doors of mud-cracked houses. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water, and water a spring, a pool among the rock, if there were the sound of water only, not the cicada and dry grass singing, but sound of water over a rock, where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip drop, drop, but there is no water. So these unpunctuated lines, they describe a nightmarish journey through dry, sandy and stony desert. The desperation of the person who is embarking on his journey. Only there are rocks and there is no water, as the poet offers various pictures of the spiritual and mythological past. And there is also a description of the biblical passage where Moses struck the rock and caused water to gush forth. But however, in the modern wasteland, water symbolism, or in this poem rather, the water symbolism is complex. In some places it is life-giving, whereas in others it has destructive power. So Tiresias here interweaves this biblical story of Christ's crucifixion with Parsifal's journey to the Chapel Perilous, because he sees a similarity between the condition of humanity after Christ's crucifixion and the predicament of the fisher king and his country after the curse fell on them. Like them, we all need today a Savior to sacrifice himself for our salvation. A Christ who can crucify himself for the sake of humanity. A Parsifal to lift the curse from us and our lands. But what happens to our Parsifal when he embarks on his journey to the Chapel Perilous? He has a hazardous journey. There is rocky deadness, lifelessness everywhere. There is no life-giving water anywhere. The sandy road, dead mountain mouth of carious teeth that cannot spit, dry sterile thunder without rain, mud-cracked houses, dry grass, all enhance the symbolism of lifelessness. And we see that there is no Moses in the modern wasteland who will strike the rock to bring about water to the non-believers in the modern wasteland. So now the mountains with dry sterile thunder without rain now become the scene of the journey to Emmaus. This scene is the vision of the Christ who was resurrected after, or on the third day after his crucifixion. So waverers and vacillators, people dwindling between belief and disbelief, have to taste the fruit of their actions. They cannot visualize or discriminate between evil and good. Doubt and disbelief will lead them to their doom. Tiresias here presents a short scene of the illusion of two such persons who are comparable to the two fools in Luke, who were slow of heart to believe whatever the prophets have spoken. On the third day after crucifixion, they are going to Emmaus, the village of Emmaus. The resurrected Christ, he draws near them and walks a few steps along with them. One of them asks the other, Who is the third who walks always beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together. But when I look ahead up the white road, there is always another one walking beside you, gliding, wrapped in a brown mantle, hooded. I do not know whether a man or a woman, but who is that on the other side of you? So these two men, they are versions of Madame Sosostris, who could not recognize the hanged man. After this section, Tiresias now brings us back to the scenes of the dissolution of the traditional culture and civilization on the East European countries following the communist revolution which happened in Russia in 1917. Eliot refers in his notes to Hermann Hesse's Blick in Chaos, written in 1920, and he quotes a passage in which the German writer has exposed his reaction to the Russian Revolution. An English translation of this passage is as follows: already at least half of Eastern Europe, on the way to chaos, drives drunkenly as though singing hymns as Dmitri Karamazov sang. The offended bourgeois laughs at the songs. The saints and the seer hear them with tears. Tiresias' concern about the decay of Eastern Europe is because in the countries of this part of Europe were born almost all the religions of the ancient world, which he fears will be wiped out by the communists. However, these scenes that his eye catches are not of the dissolution of the religio-cultural traditions. They are pictures of horror during and after an upheaval involving human life. And what kind of pictures are there? Mothers are mourning the death of their sons. Hordes of uprooted men and women are swarming over the plains. In the capitals of these new regimes, old values are cracking up and reforms are introduced in the twilight of our civilization. What is that sound high in the air, murmur of maternal lamentation? Who are those hooded hordes swarming over endless plains, stumbling in cracked earth, ringed by the flat horizon only? What is the city over the mountains, cracks and reforms and bursts in the violet air, falling towers, Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, unreal. So he says old, but essentially which is universal. Old beliefs are gone. The cultural values which are enshrined in the monuments and institutions of the ancient and modern capitals, they are slowly disintegrating. They are unreal because they reflect no values of the spirit, as Lillian Feder says. A woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings, and bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings and crawled head downward down a blackened wall, and upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. So Eliot here uses the film technique of cut and closes the short scene of the decay of Eastern Europe. He takes us to Chapel Perilous, which is filled with horrors to test Parsifal's courage. And the image of the woman drawing her long black hair out tight is based on a macabre painting by a Dutch artist, as given by Eliot in his notes to the poem. And it provides an image of modern civilization at the violet hour. The physical setting of dark walls showing bats with baby faces bending their heads downwards, it provides a symbolic background to the scenes of the destruction of Jerusalem and modern Eastern Europe. The bell of the Chapel Perilous is rung, announcing that Parsifal has survived the ordeal, but he has as yet not succeeded in his quest. The sound of the bell is echoed by the empty cisterns and exhausted wells, which signify misdirected quest and worship of wrong gods. The symbolic use of empty cisterns reminds us of God's words to Jeremiah about Israelites who changed the glory of their faith for that which doth not profit. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Ritualism in the name of religion can be of no avail. That is, we are following the same rituals. We are going to the churches, singing hymns, tolling the bells, but have lost faith in religion and God. So mere physical journey to the chapel perilous will not be the entire fulfillment of the quest. It needs strong faith and spiritual awakening. Whereas the church in the modern wasteland, it reflects the decay of civilization, and therefore its bells, they signify only formal prayers and conventional hymns devoid of the spirit of an indwelling God. The church has come to represent only the voices of godless men singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. So Parsifal has reached the chapel that is standing in a decayed hole among the mountains. So in this decayed hole among the mountains, in the faint moonlight, the grass is singing over the tumbled graves. About the chapel, there is the empty chapel only. The wind's home, it has no windows and the door swings. Dry bones can harm no one. Only a cock stood on the roof tree. Cocorico, cocorico. In a flash of lightning, then a damp gust bringing rain. So Parsifal, after reaching Chapel Perilous, sees that it is only a decayed hole among the mountains. It is empty, only the wind's home. It is windowless, and its old, broken and loose doors, they are swinging. It is surrounded by the graves and dry bones of knights who have failed in their quests, and these knights who had come before Sir Parsifal. They have died and their bones are strewn all over the place. No voice of living human beings is heard. Only a cock crows to announce the coming of dawn and warn the evil spirits to go back to their graves. All these are the physical manifestations of the spiritual vacuity and of the withering away of religious values. However, there is a flash of lightning followed by a damp gust bringing rain, and also the cock crows. The fall of rain on the Chapel Perilous in ruins has a very subtle kind of a symbolic meaning. Eliot believes that when everything we have been cherishing, whether it is material or it is spiritual, when it is totally destroyed, we may feel the necessity of a new spiritual foundation of life. Perhaps Philip R. Headings holds a similar, if not the same view, and he says, only for all ages, only when the life of temporal involvement is transcended, only when the towers and cities crumble as central psychic foci, only when it is recognized that the man's wells and cisterns, they are empty, can one approach the Grail Chapel. Make an effort. Hear the crow of the cock seen in a flash of lightning on the roof tree, and feel the damp gust that brings the rain so long awaited. Ganga was sunken, and the limp leaves waited for rain, while the black clouds gathered far distant over Himavanta. The jungle crouched, humped in silence, then spoke the thunder. So the scene now shifts from Europe to India. The Ganga, now sunken, is awaiting for rain. In the meantime, clouds gather over the Himalayan mountains, and the thunder speaks. It is an allusion to an episode in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. The threefold descendants of Prajapati, Gods, men, and demons, they dwelt as students with their father Prajapati. Having finished their studentship, the gods said, "Tell us something, sir." He told the syllable Da. Then he asked, "Did you understand?" And they replied, "We understand. You told us Damyata, control." "Yes," he said, "you have understood." Then the men asked him, "Tell us something, sir." He told the same syllable Da. Then he said, "Did you understand?" They answered, "We did understand. You told us Datta, give." "Yes," replied he, "you have understood." Then the devils said to him, "Tell us something, sir." And he repeated the same syllable Da and asked, "Did you understand?" They replied, "We did understand. You told us Dayadhvam, sympathize." "Yes, you have understood," said he. So the divine voice of thunder repeats the same Da Da Da, that is control, give and sympathize, whereas Eliot has reversed it to Datta, Dayadhvam, Damyata. So Da, Datta, what have we given? My friend, blood shaking my heart, the awful daring of a moment's surrender which an age of prudence can never retract. By this and this only we have existed, which is not to be found in our obituaries, or in memories draped by the beneficent spider, or under seals broken by the lean solicitor in our empty rooms. In the eyes of Tiresias, man possesses, in addition to human, devilish as well as divine attributes. So what is essential for a disciplined life is that man should surrender his self to a higher authority beyond him. He should curb his devilish selfishness and sympathize with others and control his wayward dispositions. But in spite of the noble message of the parable, the wastelanders are not willing to listen to it. They have not surrendered anything of theirs for the sake of others, whereas the real existence of man lies in his spiritual affinity with the divine principle, which entails the loss of self-feeling, the awareness of I-ness, the awful daring of a moment's surrender which an age of prudence can never retract. By this and this only we have existed. So this is the message of Krishna to Arjuna. Man's real self is the Atma, that is God, of which he is a part. So he should merge his ephemeral self with him. So the word Datta suggests a surrender, that is a giving in which will bring about rebirth. This surrender of the inner spirit of man to a higher cause is a great event, though it does not appear in obituary notices, nor in statements of wealth, nor it appears in the wills that are unsealed by solicitors in empty rooms. The allusion to Webster's The White Devil in the beneficent spider image shows that in the modern wasteland, giving has degenerated into mere sexual surrender, which we find exhibited in the previous sections of the poem. So the second Da, Dayadhvam. I have heard the key turn in the door once and turn once only. We think of the key, each in his prison, thinking of the key, each confirms a prison. Only at nightfall, ethereal rumors revive for a moment a broken querulousness. So the wastelanders have not curbed the evils of selfishness, egocentricity and pride. How can they abide by the second command of Prajapati, that is Dayadhvam? Like Ugolino della Gherardesca, his sons and grandsons who are locked in the horrible tower and who are starving therein, as referred to by Dante in his Divine Comedy. When only they were inside the prison, Ugolino heard the key turn once only, and the key was thrown into a river, and the prisoners, they starved to death. So in this horrible tower, they are imprisoned in the cell of their lonely individual selves. All the efforts of improving the lot of man as an individual without his identification with the rest of the community is like trying to find out the key of the prison of evil forces in an individualistic society. But because the search is made by individuals and nobody makes an effort to communicate his agony and search for a common redressal of evils, every step towards the quest for freedom carries them in the darkest corners of their prison. So while Tiresias, he is thinking about man's pride of self-sufficiency, the role of Coriolanus in human history, it flashes across his mind. Being proud of his strength and leadership, he was alienated from his people. He never cared for any authority beyond himself, nor did he fear God, and drove his country ultimately to war. As a result, he, as a broken, lonely creature, had to see the dwindling away of his dreams. Then the third Damyata. The boat responded gaily to the hand expert with sail and oar. The sea was calm. The heart would have responded gaily when invited, beating obedient in to controlling hands. So man has not listened to Prajapati's command to control his impulses and instinctive urges and develop moral sense which emanates from the belief in God as the ultimate authority, and it restrains man's unruly passions. So like a boat in a calm sea, man should respond to the call of the sailor god and surrender himself to his expert controlling hands, which may sail him across the sea of life. So here the heart is likened to a gay boat which is gliding freely on the waters, subjecting itself to the expert hands, the controlling hands of God. So that is, man should shed his fondness for individual freedom. His desires, aspirations should be in harmony with the ideals of the community, and his actions should be guided by moral principles. It all involves belief in positive values which would eradicate all doubt and despair and assure a transformation of uncertainty into faith, of human weakness into reliance on supernatural omnipotence. Such a transformation may provide integration, but only through a belief that the self can merge with a divine principle, as Lillian Feder says. The poem would have ended here on a note of affirmation of spiritual values. While the protagonist, he sat upon the shore fishing with the arid plain behind him, and his heart is assailed by doubt, and he questions, shall I at least set my lands in order? London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. So this is a refrain from an English nursery rhyme about London Bridge, and there are a heap of broken images which contribute to this stanza. And these are three quotations from three European authors. So here Tiresias, he identifies himself with the fisher king. He is waiting for the stranger and questing for truth. He is sitting on the shore of time, and behind him is lying the large wasteland of the traditional culture and civilization that is in ruins. Modern commercial culture and mechanical civilization, they are breaking into pieces. He is fishing, waiting for revelation. He has by now seen the need for Christianity, though he still cannot believe. This is a quotation from Robert Langbaum. His mind is crowded with quotations from literary works and with the image of a tragic protagonist of an English drama, all reflecting his mental state. So the first quotation is from Dante's Purgatory, the words that are uttered by Arnold Daniel to Dante, now undergoing punishment in the purgatory for his lustful life in this world. And he says to Dante, "Now I pray you by that goodness which guideth you to the summit of the stairway, be mindful in due time of my pain." So always be reminded of the pain that I am subjected to or I am suffering through. So after finishing the last word, Arnold Daniel, he dived back into the fire of purgatory with the hope of getting redemption. So in his way on Dante, Eliot says that the souls which are in the purgatory, they are suffering because they wish to suffer for purgation. In their suffering is hope. That is only through purgation, only through repentance, they can get absolved from their sins and redemption can be near at hand. And that's why they are suffering, and there is hope in their suffering. Tiresias' awareness of his inner crisis, that leads to his imagining himself to be in the purgatory of his inner self. He also wishes to suffer with this end in view, that is redemption, salvation. And the second quotation is from Parvigilium Veneris, "When shall I be like the swallow?" So this is the translation. The song of the anonymous author remains unheard. He asks when the spring will come to enable him to sing like a swallow, pouring forth his agony in his song, like Procne, who was transformed into a swallow, the sister of Philomela, who was transformed into a nightingale. So the question suggests Tiresias wishing for spiritual regeneration. And the third quotation is from Gerard de Nerval's El Desdichado, the Prince of Aquitaine of the ruined tower. The translation: the poet is like the prince disinherited. He has lost his contact with the traditions of the French troubadour poets, which he now wishes to reclaim. So this is a compendium of fragments of European myths and legends that Eliot has collected. They all denote purgation, or alternatively they speak the language of asceticism, salvation, as it is shown in Arnold's self-mortification. That is, he is undergoing self-mortification in order to get purged of all his sins. Or it may also be persuasively said that they express syllables of salvation. These fragments I have showed against my ruins. So these are the fragments that are stored in the memory of Tiresias, for he has indeed showed them against his ruins, yet he is uncertain whether these will lead him to the final goal of salvation or not. So Tiresias, he seems to be in a state of suspended animation, moving uncertainly between the two opposite poles of hope and despair. So this approach confirms the view of F.R. Lewis that the wasteland exhibits no progression and it ends where it began. Tiresias gets inspiration from the poet's resolution to rebuild the cultural heritage of his lands. He ponders over the regions in which his mind has been roving, and over this he gains from there a few fragments of human experience, assuring spiritual renewal of a maimed protagonist whose life is a debris of resolutions and irresolutions, hope and fears, quest and failure, and nothing else. Instantly his mind is filled with the horror of Hieronymo's tragedy, which is taken from Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy. He identifies himself with the poor old man who has gone mad after the murder of his son. At the request of the murderers he writes a court entertainment on the occasion when the father of one of the murderers is to arrive in the court. He writes a play which is actually a drama of his son's murder. When the murderers they ask him to tell them their roles, he says, "Why then I'll fit you." That is, I'll give you appropriate roles. When the play is staged, Hieronymo takes an opportunity to stab them. He takes revenge upon his son's murder. Hieronymo's "mad again" is referred to as a comment that is made by others on the old man's behavior. What Tiresias has projected in the wasteland, it is actually the child of his mind. So this wasteland, the poem, is the child of the mind of Tiresias, and it is a play in which the murderers of belief, that is of Hieronymo's son, should find their roles, should find appropriate roles, and the murderers of belief, they should be murdered in turn. So he is sure that people will call him crazy, old fellow, but it will reflect their ignorance and folly, or in the words of Cleant Brooks, his acceptance of what is in reality the deepest truth will seem to the present world mere madness. So they'll say that Tiresias, the old man, like Hieronymo, is mad again. Tiresias, however, still believes that by obeying the triple commands of the Prajapati, Datta Dayadhvam Damyata, that is to give, sympathize and control, man can still rehabilitate his lost glory. He closes his observation with his wish, "May there be Shanti everywhere." And this Shanti, 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 the word Shanti gives the meaning, the peace of God which passeth all understanding. So thus the poem of despair, it ends on a note of expectation. This season in hell opens out on to the hope of salvation, as Georges Caton says. So the wasteland finally projects poetically many of mankind's predicaments which emerge from the disturbing situation of the modern world after World War I. So it is primarily due to the wasteland that Eliot, like Yeats, has come to be identified with the consciousness of our age. So with this we come to the end of the poem The Wasteland. So thank you so much.